Field Vision Sports presents The Matchup with Sasha Bushka.
Kyler Murray kind of looks like a little kid running from his parents when he scrambles in the pocket.
Scott Bushka.
I had to tell my daughter that today wasn't really about her first day of school. It was really about me and the launch of our company.
And Cody Alexander.
Randomly, no. As somebody who's been around football my entire life, I literally can say that I've never smelled smelling salts, nor have I ever seen anybody actually have smelling salts. I'm sure that they were used at some point.
Like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome into the matchup by Field Vision Sports. Excited to have you with us. I'm your host, Sasha Bushka. We're joined by Footballguys fantasy expert Dave Kluge and CEO of Field Vision Sports, Scott Bushka. Fellas, how we doing today?
Doing great, man. It's a Wednesday. This is when I really start kind of looking forward at next week. I kind of spend my Mondays and Tuesdays looking back at the previous week and studying those games. And now it's time to look forward to a big week 14. A lot of big buys this week.
Yeah, for sure.
Sasha,
Scott,
I'm wondering if having the illustrious Dave Kluge on from Footballguys scared you off from making fun of me in the intro.
I'll catch that in the later intro when Cody joins the show. So don't worry.
No, but I'm pumped Dave. We're pumped to have you on, man. We've enjoyed following you guys and working with you guys this year. And as I told you in the pregame show, I need a little fantasy advice this week. So maybe we can just get it live on air.
All right, let's do it. Yeah. And Sasha, I got to say the matchup index article that you've been writing for Footballguys, I'm the one going through and editing that before we publish it. It's definitely helped me a little bit with my weekly rankings process. Every now and then I'll be like, I'm making some good points here, and I'll bump some guys up and down a little bit based on some of the advice that you're giving.
I like that. I appreciate you saying that. That comes out every Friday on Footballguys website. Excited to have you here with us, Dave. The name of the show is The Matchup. So that kind of segues into something I was going to talk about. When you're going through and making rankings for fantasy football, how much does a player's matchup factor in to how you rank them compared to just like, I know this player is really good and this player is not as good as that player?
Yeah, you got to weigh everything. I mean, talent is definitely my first jumping off point when I start with my rankings. I want talented players at the top and then, less talented players. But after I kind of go through with my talent evaluation rankings is kind of how I start my process. And then from there, I look at the matchups. And the first thing I look at the matchup is the Vegas over under. If we're looking at a high over under, we're expecting a lot of fantasy points. Those guys get a bump up. The games that have low over unders, those guys get bumped down a little bit. A trap that I've fallen into in the past is trying to predict a game script, which might seem like something that you can do well. Hey, this team's a 7.5 point favorite. The other team's probably going to be trailing. And, if they're trailing, they're going to have to throw more. So you start putting a little bit more weight on the pass catchers. But I've realized it typically doesn't work out that way. Even if Vegas is really good at calling the end of game outcome, a lot of times that'll come in the last 10, 15 seconds of the game. And, the game script doesn't always work out the way we want it to. So I'll look at, teams that are susceptible to the pass and give the pass catchers going up against them a little bump. Teams that are susceptible to the run, I'll give them a little bit of a bump. I try to weigh the matchups based on how these guys do against specific positions, but the one trap I try not to fall into too much is predicting the game script of each game.
If you can predict game script, you can make a lot of money.
Yeah.
we've in the business that we're in, which is, similar, making player projections, we try to do the same thing. And it's hard, man. We got a lot of smart data scientists thinking about it.
Yeah. It seems like the games always get to the end point that Vegas or somebody expects, but they have circuitous ways of getting there. So that's interesting. That's interesting insight. We've got we're having you on at a fortuitous time because we don't normally talk a lot of fantasy. We're talking about like just the games and matchups and all that kind of stuff. But we're heading into week 14 of the fantasy season. A lot of people have must-win games with the playoffs coming up. And I want to get in a little bit into like playoff roster construction at the end. But we'll start with week 14 itself. Just at the quarterback position alone, Lamar Jackson, Bo Nix, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels are all on bye. There's 6 teams on bye this week. So how do you navigate if you have like a key player that's been winning you games all year and you have to win in week 14 to make the playoffs?
Well, it's funny, every time when I'm in draft season, like the blanket advice I always give is don't worry about draft week or don't worry about bye weeks. You'll cross that bridge when you get to it. Now, all of these people are in must-win games, and they've got no Lamar Jackson and they've got no Cortland Sutton, and these guys that have gotten them into very, good spots in their fantasy league. So that's unfortunately the game we play. But I try to start mapping these things out a little bit ahead of time. We were talking pre-show. I'm in a high stakes league right now. $350 buy-in with $250,000 up on top. And at the time I drafted Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels. I noticed about 4 weeks ago, well, both of these guys are going to have the same buy. So rather than trying to wait until waivers process today and get in a bidding war with everybody else over these quarterbacks, 4 weeks ago, I looked at the matchups and I said, well, Aaron Rodgers is playing up against Miami. He's the best quarterback available with a decent matchup. Not crazy about it, but with so many other quarterbacks rostered at this point in the season, you've just got to take what you can get. So my advice now doesn't really help all that much. It would be to try to, take advantage of this 3-4 weeks ago and get ahead of the curve. But if you're sitting there now, there's some guys that might be available that have good matchups. But the problem is everybody's kind of bidding on these same players right now. So Jameis Winston, he's been airing it out like crazy the last few weeks, but he's got a tough matchup coming up against Pittsburgh. Luckily, sacks and turnovers can be offset by pass volume. So Jameis Winston is a guy that I like to go after. Caleb Williams, for whatever reason, is still available in almost 50% of leagues. Back-to-back 30-point games that he's coming off of, has a really nice stretch during the fantasy playoffs. So that's a guy I'd try to pivot to as well. But we talked about it on this morning's show of the Footballguys Fantasy Football show that I do with Alfredo Brown. And this is the time of year where you can do something kind of fun and start dropping big name players that have really tough schedules for the rest of the season. Rather than just trying to kind of address your team needs, you can start trying to manipulate and sabotage some of the other rosters out there as well.
All right. So if you're smarter than me and you're a fantasy professional, so you started thinking about this 4 weeks ago. I also have Lamar Jackson. I'm 7-6. I need to win the game to get into playoffs, and I have two choices. I'm a dumbass, and I didn't start thinking about this till last night at like 11:59.
I wouldn't say you're a dumbass. I'd say you're just a normal fantasy football manager. That's how they take this. Yeah.
So I ended up with two guys on my roster. I got Geno Smith and Cooper Rush. I saw the look you gave me when I mentioned Cooper Rush at the start of the show.
Yeah.
But I want you to help me make a decision. Geno Smith against the Cardinals, who have been a little bit tougher on quarterbacks. He just played them, and they only scored 16 points against Arizona. Or Cooper Rush Monday night playing the Bengals, who let an old, washed-up Russell Wilson, I guess you could debate whether or not he's washed up, go for 414 yards against them last week. Who are you going with?
I totally understand why you'd want to go with Arizona. I mean, you look at fantasy points against, they are third worst in points allowed. They're giving up 21.3 points on average to the quarterback position. Seattle's been a little bit tougher. Not Seattle. I'm sorry. Arizona's been a little bit tougher, but they still rank in the top half of points allowed. And this is just one of those situations where I say, my rankings process starts with talent, and the talent level between a guy like Geno Smith and Cooper Rush is very vast. I understand wanting to chase the matchup here. I know that's what you guys do at Field Vision with the matchup index, and the matchup for Cooper Rush is objectively a better matchup, but I think I'd still go with Geno here. I think that he's just a much better quarterback, even with a tougher matchup. I've still got Geno about 8 spots ahead of Cooper Rush.
All right. Thank you. Helpful.
It's tough though, man, because you see it all the time. These guys that are ranked, QB 26 on the week and can go off, and all it takes for Cooper Rush to pay off is one little slant to CeeDee Lamb that he takes to the house.
I know. It probably makes it easier that CeeDee seems questionable to me.
Right. If CeeDee's out, Cooper Rush is probably going to be my lowest ranked quarterback on the week.
Yeah.
Dave, you've been doing this for a while and paying attention to this for a long time. Is there always this many buys on the last week of the regular season in fantasy? Is that feels like an issue that's come up over the last couple of years, but it's kind of like a new quirk in the NFL schedule?
I can go on and on about bye weeks. I think it's so dumb that, some teams are forced to take their bye in week 5. Some have to wait until week 14. And it does always seem like these late bye weeks in week 14 are just loaded with some of the best teams out there. You talked about the quarterbacks that are on bye, but there are so many running backs and wide receivers. There's people right now that are sitting as the 1 seed in their league. They can't even field a lineup this week without desperately reaching for guys on waivers. So I think that, for fantasy and sports betting, it does become quite a headache for us. Sigmund Bloom, another longtime Football Guy staffer, he's currently on year 19 of the Audible podcast that they've been doing for us at Football Guys. He always says that there should just be a mid-season bye week where every team takes their buys at once. That way there's no advantages or disadvantage to every team. Every team gets an opportunity to kind of just take a week off, rest up, and come back the next week. I think that would make a lot more sense. But of course, the NFL wants to make money and they want football games playing every single week. So, as far as how often this happens, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it definitely seems like, we got 6 big teams on bye this week with a lot of playmakers. I can't remember it ever being that dramatic before.
Yeah. Football professionals could take a vacation during the season too if everybody took their bye at the same time.
It would
we
be lovely.
could take the kids to brunch,
Yeah.
have a relaxing Sunday morning.
Yeah. So week 14, not everybody's in a must-win game here. Some people are just coasting into the playoffs. But as you start looking at your roster heading into the playoffs, is there some things you do differently when getting ready for the playoffs than you would throughout the season? And highlight some of the key differences in roster construction for this 3-week stretch where buys will be behind us, so you have full access to all your players.
That's a great question. And every single team does have to take this a little bit differently. If you're in the 7th seed right now and you're just desperately trying to get a win this week just so you can get into the playoffs, you might not have the same luxury as a team who already locked in a playoff spot a few weeks ago. For those teams that have already locked in a playoff win or a playoff spot or a first round bye, whatever it may be, this is the time of year where I am okay trimming all of the fat off my roster. And what I mean by the fat is the QB2s, the tight end 2s, the wide receiver 5s, those guys that you're kind of holding on to as insurance pieces in case something happens. The reality is, if you are riding a guy like Lamar Jackson right now, who has just been dominant in fantasy football, if he goes down in the playoffs, you're screwed. And having a guy like Geno Smith on the bench, no offense, Scott, probably is going to make a huge difference for you. The reality is you can go to the waiver wire and get a replacement level quarterback. You can get a replacement level tight end, or you can always find those wide receivers that have good matchups on a week in and week out basis that you can stream as your wide receiver 2 or your flex. What I want to do is load up on as many injury away running backs as possible. And these are guys that have no weekly value right now. I'm talking about the Braylon Allens and the Zach Charbonnets and these guys that have no real standalone value. But if Breece Hall gets injured or if Kenneth Walker gets injured, then they have massive contingent upside. And we're looking at them as potential top 10 options. Isaiah Guerrero is a perfect example right now. If you were stashing a guy like Isaiah Guerrero, which you should have been because that's a good practice to have a guy whose injuries away from a big workload on a good offense, then congratulations. You just woke up this morning and you got yourself a top 15 running back that you can plug into your lineup, as opposed to all the other people who didn't have Isaac Guerrero stashed, and they're bidding everything that they have remaining to try to get him. So what I'm trying to do at this point in the season is just cut the fat and get as many injury away running backs as possible. The one other thing I'll say is that if you don't have a dominant quarterback, and when I say dominant, I'm talking Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, those guys that you can just plug in that are essentially matchup proof on a week in and week out basis. What I try to do is start looking at some other guys that have good matchups between now and the end of the season and kind of map out that path to the playoffs. We talked about this on today's show, but we've got a tool and Football Guys, our strength of schedule tool, that shows you how good every matchup is for each position on each team. And for example, a team like the Carolina Panthers, right now, Bryce Young has been trending up. Bryce Young has 2 really nice matchups in weeks 15 and week 17, but he's got a really tough matchup in week 16. So if you're able to get a guy like Bryce Young that you can rely on in week 15 and 17 through the playoffs, you pair him up with a guy who has a good matchup in week 16, and you kind of map your path to week 17 rather than trying to take it on a week by week basis, just look at a month ahead.
Yeah. You talked about mapping your path. Is it a similar strategy? Like maybe you haven't had a really great defense all year and you've just been kind of picking the right one up each week. Are you willing to cut, say, like my wide receiver 5 right now is Jordan Addison. And I was going to ask you, would you cut him for Charbonnet or Allen that you mentioned earlier? But also, would you cut him to carry 2 defenses and look at their matchups throughout?
And that's another good question. The defense is kind of the same as quarterbacks. I don't talk about defenses by default because I know they're in about 50% of leagues, but for the leagues that you do have defenses, absolutely. And that's, one where I'm looking at right now that I've been recommending is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you look between now and the end of the season, They've got Las Vegas this week, which is a nice matchup. They've got Dallas in week 16, which is a nice matchup. And they've got Carolina in week 17, which is a nice matchup. But I don't want to play them in week 15 when they're going up against the Chargers. So I'll kind of look ahead now and see at the other teams that have good matchups in week 15. And Atlanta goes up against Las Vegas, and they're available in a lot of leagues. Kansas City and Cincinnati, they've got nice matchups. You're probably not getting them. Green Bay, though, faces off against Seattle, which is another good matchup. So if you've got Tampa Bay, for instance, you know that you can rely on them for 3 of the next 4 weeks, but then you pick up Atlanta or Green Bay to get you through week 15, knowing that after week 15, you can cut them and add another injury away back.
Scott, you do you have any questions about your own fantasy team?
I don't. mean, you brought it up, but both fantasy leagues I'm in, we only have 3 bench spots, which make it really hard. Like, I tried to pick up Garendo last night. I was number 3 on the waiver wire. I didn't get him, obviously, but it makes it impossible to do things like stash, a running back that's going to be injured, or quite frankly, even have a good like wide receiver 5, like, because you're basically like just trying to work around buys every week. So no,
And I do like the 3 bench spots too. I mean, I feel like everybody's constantly trying to change formats in fantasy football because just your regular, 10 teams starting 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a flex with 8 bench spots. Everybody's done that before. So now people are trying to get creative. I've seen leagues, Scott, where there are no bench spots. So you're kind of posed with those problems when you get to, CD Lamb's on bye. Am I going to just go without a wide receiver 2 this week and just keep in a guy who's on bye, or do I want to try to drop him and address this weakness? And that's when you really start getting into some kind of crazy game theory week to week, how you're going to set these lineups.
Right. I'm an unsophisticated fantasy player in unsophisticated leagues that to be honest with you, like both of them are in Yahoo, and were like the rules and parameters were set in like 2008, and they've just continued all the way. I do have and Sasha, I don't know how long we have Dave for, but I do have a more, and sorry, we should have prepped you with this question, but I do have a more overarching question about like football and fantasy football in general, because I'm thinking back to like the early days of fantasy, and it totally changed the way that people watched football, right? Because all of a sudden it's like, I'm a Chiefs fan, I'm just going to watch the Chiefs, to now I have this fantasy team and I care about players on all these different teams. So there's a reason for me to care. Fantasy football is now a mature industry, and this other thing has come along, which is legalized sports betting, which almost like it has accelerated people having other reasons to watch games, right? And care about it. And to be honest with you, like, we're in the business of football, you're in the business of football. It's a good time to be in the business of football because there's all of these new things coming in that are giving people reasons to watch. But I'm just curious if you think like the emergence of betting into the football world is going to create like new ways that people approach fantasy, and new ways that the business of fantasy takes shape, whether that's like more of a live in-game component or like more like week to week payouts. I know there's the whole DFS industry. I'm just curious, like, your point of view on how like the emergence of betting maybe like changes or tweaks the way people approach fantasy long term.
I think that the way all of this is changing, just the way technology is bleeding into fantasy football and sports betting, there's going to be changes that I can't even think of right now. Like somebody's going to develop some sort of new way to play football, bet on football that I haven't even thought of. I think best ball is kind of a perfect example of that. I don't know if you guys are familiar with best ball, where you just draft a team, set it for the year, and there's no lineup setting, no roster or free agency or anything like that. And now they're doing weekly best ball tournaments as well, where you're just drafting 6 players every single week. I've seen this fast draft app pop up from the guys over at Player Profiler, where you could just set your rankings and draft 25 teams in a matter of minutes and not even have to think about setting lineups. So the game is nonstop evolving. What I have noticed, though, is that now, because of legalized sports betting, we can use the props that are set by Vegas lines to help with our analysis a little bit. And I kind of alluded to that earlier, talking about my rankings, where I'll look at the over-unders. That's the most basic way to use it, is just looking at Vegas over-unders to see which games are going to be high scoring and which games aren't. But then you can also start looking at the individual player prop lines and kind of use that as a guardrail as well when we're doing projections to look at what Vegas is projecting these players and make sure that we aren't totally out of line. Sasha, I know that's a lot of what you do in that matchup index article is kind of look at the projections set by Field Vision, the projections set by Footballguys, the projections set by Vegas, and kind of look at the discrepancies and where you will get, a little 3 to 5% differences here and there. For the most part, they're all pretty much in line. And I think that having all of that extra data is just making the casual average fan now so much smarter and so much easier to consume the data.
Yeah, I think it used to be like for a savvy football person, really easy to dominate a fantasy league and like always be a step ahead of people. And now with the access to information and leagues get smarter as you go along anyways, because you got more people getting more serious about it. But that process has just been sped up over time. I'll give you a couple of quick hitters just so people can get to know you a little bit as well. Do you have I know you're a fantasy professional and your favorite team is your fantasy team, but who is your favorite football team?
Born and raised in Chicago, so I never really had a choice. I moved out to Colorado, 6 or 7 years ago now with my wife, but born and raised in Chicago, family was season ticket holders, so I've been going to Bears games my whole life. And I often joke around, if you did a sort of census of the fantasy football industry, it seems like all of us are either Bears fans, Browns fans, or Bills fans. There's something about being in one of those cold Midwestern states where you can't do anything in the winter except sit around and watch football. And then these downtrodden fan bases that have never had anything to cheer for, they're the ones that typically turn their sights to fantasy football. Like, we love football, but you put too much energy into the Bears and you're going to drive yourself nuts. Put too much energy into the Browns or the Bills, you'll drive yourself nuts. So there's a ton of overlap between the full-time industry professionals and people who root for those three teams.
That's exactly where my mind went when you said those three teams. Is you got to pay attention to your fantasy team.
Exactly. You'll drive yourself nuts just paying attention to those teams.
Do you have a favorite all-time player?
My heart says Jay Cutler. I loved watching him play. Of course, even in my Twitter bio, Jay Cutler apologist. I felt like I was always the guy going to bat for Jay Cutler when the entire city of Chicago was turning against him. That's a little bit more of a tongue-in-cheek favorite player. My favorite player, we talked about him earlier, obviously over the hill now, 41 years old, but prime Aaron Rodgers was like nothing I had ever seen before. And being a Bears fan, anybody of my friends or family back at home would slap me in the mouth for saying this, but I'm a fan of football first. And I do love the Bears and I'm a Bears fan, but I'm a fan of good football. And the things Aaron Rodgers was doing on the field during his prime, I was 12 years old when he came into the league, and I was slack-jawed watching the things that he would do on the field, and he just continued to improve and get better. It was brutal as a Bears fan watching him, come in and throw the discount double check celebration, yelling that he owns us to the crowd. But, he had every opportunity to do so and every right to do so because he earned it. He's definitely my favorite player.
Nice.
That's
Last one for me.
That's back when Aaron Rodgers was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Prime Aaron Rodgers or prime Mahomes?
I think Mahomes is the better player, but you wouldn't have Mahomes if it wasn't for Aaron Rodgers. And I feel like that's constantly the evolution. You could say that you wouldn't have Aaron Rodgers if it wasn't for Dante Culpepper, and you wouldn't have Dante Culpepper if it wasn't for Fran Tarkenton. Like, I don't know how far back we want to go here, but Aaron Rodgers was the one during my kind of pivotal years as a preteen and teenager getting into football. The first guy I saw doing things on a field that just left me speechless.
I thought for sure, talking about going far back, I thought for sure you were going to say your favorite player was all-time Jayhawk great Gale Sayers.
I did get a chance to meet him once. Super nice guy. A little bit before my time. I know my grandpa, though. You ask him who his favorite player was, and Gale Sayers would be the first name out of his mouth without thinking twice.
Kansas Comet, baby.
Yep.
Last one from me, and if Scott has anything he can throw in, and then we'll let you get out of here because we've gone pretty long already. Do you have a favorite all-time fantasy player, like someone that you always targeted, that you always wanted on your team?
I mean, I won leagues with some good players that I like, but the one guy that I kind of joke around that I just could not quit and drafted year after year after year, and it never panned out, was Kenny Britt with the Tennessee Titans. Loved him in college, loved what I saw year one, and just kept going back to the well for like 7 years. I don't think he ever even eclipsed like 400 yards after his rookie season, but that was the player that I kind of became a joke even after he retired, was still in the player pool, and I would still take him in the last round of my home league every year.
Just goes to show you that even fantasy professionals get attached and make mistakes based on that.
I was going to say Kenny Britt was never good.
He had a short little run where he caught a bunch of touchdowns his rookie season, and I had him on my roster for that run and chased that high ever since.
Yeah. Sasha, I don't have anything to add. I would just say, Dave, you guys over the Football Guys, or you guys do awesome stuff, create amazing content. You guys have been incredible partners to us. So we just want to say thank you for joining us on here, and thanks for, being supporters of what we do, like what we're doing. You and Joe and the whole team have been amazing. So we appreciate it, man. And we'll keep like looking to you and your Twitter and Blue Sky now for fantasy advice for the amateurs.
And I'll keep leaning on you guys for the matchup index on our start sit show that we do every single Thursday. So appreciate what you guys are doing as well.
That was Dave Kluge. Check out his 3 Up, 3 Down article on Footballguys that just came out today. Comes out every Wednesday. It's a good read. Some good insights there, and we appreciate you coming on. We'll take a quick break, and we'll let the Coach A and Felix join the show to talk a little power rankings. You're listening to The Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Welcome back into The Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Excited to be back with you after a fun interview with Dave Kluge. I'm your host, Sasha Bushka, joined on stage now by Director of Football Operations, Cody Alexander. Also on the stage, Felix Johnson, because we're getting ready for the power rankings section. And the Joe Bryant of Field Vision Sports, Scott Bushka. Fellas, how we feeling today?
Doing great.
Oh, you're so creative, Sasha.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. The question is like, who's more of a legend? Your last week's alter ego, John Madden, or Joe Bryant?
At this point, Joe Bryant.
Well, okay, fair enough. Let's dive into the content here. We've got Felix Johnson's power rankings. Excited to fire those up after week 13, after Thanksgiving, and now's where it really starts to make a difference where teams are in this, and we have a really pretty clear picture of where teams are, and it's just a matter of the stretch run. This week in the honorable mentions, he's got the Rams and the Buccaneers, Los Angeles Rams, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Number 10, Los Angeles Chargers. Number 9, Denver Broncos. Got that Monday night win. Number 8, Pittsburgh Steelers, who just won another divisional game against the Bengals. Number 7, Baltimore Ravens, coming off the loss to the Eagles. Number 6, the team that just keeps winning, the Minnesota Vikings. Number 5, the other team that just keeps winning, the Kansas City Chiefs, who were previously 3. Number all the way up to 4 from 6 is the Green Bay Packers. Number 3, the Philadelphia Eagles, maybe the hottest team in the league with 8 straight wins. Number 2, the Detroit Lions. And number 1, the Buffalo Bills. Any of those 3 you could call the hottest teams in the league, those top 3. Mm-hmm. Let's dive into these power rankings. Cody, where do you see issues with the list this week?
Yeah, the one that I think that because they have Lamar Jackson and because their offense is relatively, good statistically, we think that the Ravens are this great team. And the reality is they're pretty much a better Bengals team. They have an elite offense and their defense just isn't very good. And I think that when we're going into the season, they're starting to pile on some of these losses, and we can't think of them as a top team anymore. I would almost argue that you've got a better defense in the Broncos and the Chargers. If those 2 teams play in a wild card round, if the Ravens have to play one of those 2 teams in a wild card round, who's not to say that both of those teams leave winning? So I just feel like when you get to this point in the season, you are what you repeatedly do. The defense is not very good in Baltimore. They're losing games, and they're starting to add up as they start playing more of their divisional rivals. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a team that kind of just barely makes the playoffs here in the next couple of weeks.
What Cody, what famous philosopher said that? You are
Man,
what
I
you
don't know, like
repeatedly do. I think
Socrates or
there's some
something.
Greek guy who said that.
Aristotle. One of them. I'm sure it was Aristotle or something.
Felix, do you have a defense for yourself on that?
I think with the Ravens and particularly with and looking at it now, probably I should have them switching spots with the Steelers just because they beat them straight up, and Lamar Jackson seems to have struggles against the Steelers all the time. But with the Broncos and Chargers, the reason why I think the Ravens are better is just that they have Lamar Jackson and, for that matter, Derrick Henry. Like, the Ravens have had a bad defense for all year long, and they still have gotten to this point because of who they are offensively. And that is one of the elite offenses in the league. When they have 2 MVP candidates, it kind of overcomes the defense to the tune of 8 wins so far. But like you were saying, it can prove dangerous. I just don't know if we haven't seen it yet, and I'm not going to move them down in the power rankings for something we just haven't seen all the way yet until they lose 5 more games or whatever the case may be.
One of the things that's a big debate in the NFL world right now, and I think the reason people are talking about it so much is because the league and the commentary around it has become very Chiefs-centric. So it's like, do you want a team that wins close games or a team that blows people out? And I think the answer to that question is, like, obviously a blowout is better than a close win, but you only want a team that blows people out if they also don't lose every third week.
Right.
Like,
Right.
if you're blowing people out, but every third week you're tripping up, you got to win 3 or 4 games to get through the playoffs. So that doesn't really work for you. So in that case, you take the team that wins close games. And I think that's the Ravens' problem, is like, it's the inconsistencies.
And they're in the toughest, if not the toughest division in football, with the Steelers being a real team this year. Like, Jameis Winston figuring out the Browns somehow, some way. And the Bengals, like, I know that they're the Bengals and they've already beat them twice already, but their offense is explosive and you have to score 40 to beat them. So the Ravens, as good as they were last year, they're not that team anymore. And I think we're kind of holding them up to that expectation, and they're just not that team. But they're still a pretty good team in the AFC.
Yeah. First of all, you are what you repeatedly do. It was Aristotle. Nice work, Cody. One of the most learned people covering football, ladies and gentlemen. I agree with your commentary on the misplacement of the Ravens in this list 100%. And the fact that, like, the only reason you get half of a pass on this is because every other person in football seems to be doing the same thing. Like, I listened to a podcast yesterday. The names of the people in the podcast shall remain nameless, but they talked about the best team or who was most likely to come out of the AFC. And the entire conversation revolved around the Bills and the Ravens. They, like, didn't even bring up the Chiefs. And I'm like, the Ravens are 8-6. People seem to misremember that week 1 game against the number of times I've heard people talk about how the Ravens were like a half an inch of a toe away from beating the Chiefs. Like, people forget how that game played out, right? The Chiefs controlled the entire game. They were up 27-20. The Ravens had to make a furious late game drive that ended with a toe on the line. Even if he catches it, it's 27-26. They have to convert a 2-point conversion if they want to win. If not, you go to overtime. But the Chiefs were in control of that entire game. So,
and not to interrupt, but they lost to the Raiders the next week, so that, like, even dampened that close loss even more. So I agree with you on that.
Right. But I think, Cody, your point about them being a better version of the Bengals is actually is a really good one. And the reason, the issue I find with your rankings is having them above Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Because, like, Pittsburgh has clearly shown themselves to be a more consistently better team, right? Including the head-to-head win over the Ravens. And I think that even the Ravens offense is showing some cracks and some flaws in the last couple weeks. So at this point, like, 8-6, I'm with you. I think there's a lot of teams that can beat the Ravens in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they are 8-5. I'll just clarify that. I let it slide the first time, but we've only played 13 weeks, so you can't have 14 on the ledger.
8-5.
They're going into their bye this week for all you Lamar Jackson owners. We talked about that at length with Dave Kluge, though. Go
Well,
ahead.
and I think that's a big deal too, because after the bye, they play the Giants, and they're probably going to smash them 41-14 or something like that. And then at least some of your feelings about the Ravens and how good they might actually be will return. At least some of them. I know it's the Giants and whatever it is, but it'll be an impressive performance on the ledger. And so I still think the Ravens are a playoff team. I mean, by the time we get to the playoffs, they might be thought of as better than the Steelers just because the Steelers haven't won a playoff game in however many years with Mike Tomlin as their head coach. And then all they really have to do is figure out how to get the Steelers to lose a couple of games, and because they've already lost to them, and got to figure out that way. But again, Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, 2 MVP candidates on one side of the football. You're going to give them a little bit more respect than what they probably deserve, just because of how impressive they are on a week-to-week basis. Even in the losses, like Lamar Jackson wasn't bad this past week.
Yeah. But the other thing that people are forgetting about Baltimore, and we forget to talk about in general, is that special teams really, really matter. And special teams actually really, really matter in close games. And like Justin Tucker has serious issues. He cost him 7 points on Sunday. He cost him a bunch of points against Pittsburgh in that game. So I'm staring at Baltimore thinking 2 of their 3 units are really pretty shaky.
Yeah. And if Tucker doesn't miss those field goals, that game could play out completely differently, because it never becomes a 2-score game. And once it became a 2-score game, that was kind of like the death knell. There just wasn't enough time for the Ravens. Now, the way they went down, the Eagles just kind of let them score on that last drive. So you can't just say, oh, the 7 points, they lost by 5 sort of thing. But it definitely could have played out differently. And it's crazy to say, like, the guy that has been pretty much crowned as the greatest kicker of all time, at least if you're just looking at percentages and like length of kicks and stuff, maybe you go with other kickers like Vinatieri if you're looking at clutch kicks and things like that, is now a liability for them. It's a strange thing to see.
Well, I think the biggest thing in this show's offensive bias, just when we look at NFL and just general, just football, it's what the climate is right now. I saw something the other day. Somebody said like the Ravens have lost like 22 points within their 5 losses or something, and all of those can be attributed to some sort of a miss by Tucker. So if Tucker makes those, then they're undefeated. And and I just think too, when people go and they look at the DVOA, they're 16 percentage points higher than the next person. So, it's like their offense is more efficient than even the Lions. The problem that you get when you only look at offense is that it is just every playoff. It's like people have this epiphany. Oh, I forgot. Defense and running the football wins championships. It's not passing every single down. And I think that becomes the issue in the season. And that's one of these highlighted by the Ravens, is that the offense is so good that we forget how bad the passing defense actually is.
Right. And with their running game being so potent, like they can't figure out some things defensively to try and play some complementary football that like what you're saying, they can win the Super Bowl maybe off of their run game. They just got to figure out defensively, how do we scheme it up to beat Mahomes and Allen and whomever else they'd have to get there.
Yeah, and each game is its own entity too. Like, yeah, they scored 40 or nearly 40 against the Bengals twice, but that was only because their defense gave up so much that they had to score that much to win.
Right.
And so your offense is like inherently going to look better when your defense isn't doing anything.
Yeah, and this is still a team that dropped 35 on the Bills. Like they've done other things outside of just beating the Bengals up a couple of times and dropping 40 on them. Like, again, they have 2 MVP candidates, and those have been probably the longest lasting ones from the beginning of the season.
Yeah. Felix said something earlier about like the Ravens, and he thinks they're going to make the playoffs. I think like they definitely are, but that kind of highlighted and made me think of like the AFC playoff race is really boring. Like the way the Bengals have slid and the Chargers and the Broncos keep winning. The really only race is the Texans and the Colts in the South. Like you could see the Colts overtaking the Texans the way the Texans have been playing. And then if you think the Dolphins can get hot, but after that performance on Thanksgiving, I don't really see it. And so you kind of know your 7 playoff teams in the AFC now.
Yeah. I think
Right.
the 1 seed race is going to get interesting.
Yeah, that's really all you have to argue with at this point is like how many games will the Chiefs lose?
Right.
Can anybody catch them? Will the Bills lose again? Right.
Well,
so like,
even on the Bills' point, particularly their next 2 weeks, they go to Los Angeles, play the Rams. That's going to be a tough coach and quarterback to go up against, and they play the Lions after that. So they've got 2 games coming up where it's just like, golly, can they hold on to this 1 seed and beat some legitimate championship contenders? And I know the Rams are who they are, but McVay and Stafford, but then the Lions looking like the best team in the league. The Bills also look like the best team in the league too. So can they beat them and actually at least play well against them, and then we feel differently about Josh Allen in the MVP discussion, and then like you guys are talking about with the playoff race and everything.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I would be curious, Cody, your point of view on. I mean, this is a bit off topic, but like the Bills either lose in the next 2 weeks or they don't lose, and I personally think they're just a much better team than the Rams. So I would be curious if there's anything matchup wise that we see that gives the Rams a chance in that game. But for me, it's like they either lose to Detroit or they're not losing the rest of the season, and the Chiefs have to win out.
yeah, the one concern you do have with them is that if the Rams can control the game through the run, that's been one of the things with the surrounding the Bills. There has been concern about the run game. The problem with that is that that's what that defense is designed to do, which is kind of that bend don't break in the run game. They're going to play nickel the whole time. Now that they've got, Matt Milano's coming back, they've got Bernard back, Taron Johnson is back. So some of the issues that they had at the beginning of the year that were really people were kind of concerned about the run game, they're going to be able to clean those up in the next couple of weeks. That would be the only thing that I would really worry about. Just if Stafford goes on a heater and they can take care of they can take advantage of some of the zone issues. But to me, it's, can we control the run game? If we can, then maybe we can keep this thing close. That would be the only way that I see it. It's going to be a fun game, but that would be the only one. I mean, I think it's going to be kind of like a 31-20 game, 31-24, kind of, where the Rams are going to move the ball, but the Bills will be in control.
Fellas, you got any last words for Felix before I drop him off stage and we start looking at more Week 14 matchups?
I think it's dumb that you don't have the Seahawks in front of the Rams.
I forgot about the Seahawks. I forgot they even existed.
That's what I'm saying. They're actually in the lead for the NFC West. They're the number 1 team, which is wild.
Honestly, I don't even like watching Aaron Rodgers play football anymore, so I just completely forgot who the Seahawks played, what happened this weekend.
Just
so
ignored that game.
Yeah. It's just up in the corner. I didn't care.
Yeah, I also thought that was dumb. We don't need to belabor it, but I am disappointed, Felix, that I think it's disrespectful to drop the Chiefs to 5th. And I'm disappointed that you hopped on to the rest of the media wagon. Because here's the deal. Like, the Lions lose or beat the Bears by 3 at home on Thanksgiving, divisional rival. And what happens? Like, the Bears' entire coaching staff gets fired, right? It's the Bears' fault. The Chiefs beat the Raiders by 2 on a Black Friday game, which is, look, Chiefs Raiders is generally always close. Like, it's a rivalry game. They're going to come in and play them tough. I'm not saying the Chiefs don't have flaws. They 100% do. The biggest issue is that Andy Reid abandoned the run game in that game. Ran the ball before the last drive. He ran the ball 4 times in the entire second half, right? And they couldn't protect at left tackle. But like, so what that they lost, that they beat the Raiders by 2 and there was a fumble snap. It doesn't matter. Like, the Chiefs are still the Chiefs.
That's not exactly why I dropped them, particularly with the Chiefs, knowing that they're rarely going to lose. And even last year when they did lose, they still won the Super Bowl. You kind of have to treat the Chiefs beating the Raiders by 2 on a snafu kind of as a loss, because against an average, a barely well-run team, if Aiden O'Connell can figure it out for one more snap, they kick a field goal and win that game against any other team that the Chiefs are going to be playing when the games actually matter, probably in a situation like that. The defense hasn't been as good over the last month. The left tackle situation does worry me, but DJ Humphries coming in should try and fix that situation. And then Andy Reid sometimes does, like you said, he only ran the ball 4 times before that last drive. Can get a little stubborn, a little conservative, and just be a little odd. And so I think with the Chiefs, when they win games like that, being that they're not going to lose for whatever reason that the football gods have decided, you kind of have to treat those as losses and address their problems primarily.
Yeah. All right. I think Sasha being 12 beers deep, yelling during that last snap is what caused that fumble. Just
that is what it was. Let's be honest, guys.
Not 12 years.
Chris Jones said it. I think he actually mentioned you by name, Sasha.
Yeah. That sounds about. Scott didn't even see it, I don't think. I had to like turn around and be like, he just fumbled the snap.
I actually don't think I'd see. I was busy being pissed that the Chiefs ran the ball on 2nd and 5 versus throwing to get the first down. Anyways,
yeah,
let's move
I
on.
remember.
Exactly.
All right, Felix, great times as always. Appreciate you doing those power rankings every week. Everyone should check those out on the app and the blog. The write-ups are quite entertaining underneath the teams. We go over like the order here, but like go check out Felix's writing. All right, fellas. What do you say we look at week 14? The 2 best games that I see just right off the top is obviously Thursday night, Green Bay at Detroit, divisional matchup, and then another divisional matchup on Sunday night, the Chargers at Kansas City. To me, those 2 games stand out above the rest, but there's some other interesting matchups as well. Let's start with that Thursday night game. We have our best bets in the app already, so people can go check those out. I think we like Detroit as a company, but Cody, do you want to lay out why?
I just think that they match up really well with what the Packers want to do on defense. And then obviously what the Packers struggle with on offense. They struggle with man coverage. What does the Lions want to do? They want to run man coverage. I think that they're kind of built for that gun run offense that the Packers play. And so I think it's going to be close. But I do think that that Detroit handles them. It's in Detroit, so I think it's gonna. They don't lose at home. I think that this is going to be just another victory for the Lions.
Cody, what do you you are a defensive expert at something's got to give with all these injuries on the defensive side of the ball. And at what point do you start getting worried about all the guys going down for Detroit?
Yeah, I think they've been able to mitigate a lot of it up front. I am a little bit concerned with just the linebacker issues. They're just running out of them. I mean, Barnes is lost early in the year. Anzalone broke his leg. You have, Rodriguez, who just went down and is questionable as well. So really you're sitting there and you have Campbell, the Iowa guy, box linebacker, can't really move very well. That's the guy that you have. That becomes a concern. I think in the secondary, you have 2 safeties that are playing at an all-pro level. You have one of the best safety hybrid nickels in the league, which is Brian Branch. Outside at corner, Carlton Davis has been banged up. Terrion Arnold's been really good. I think that some of those issues in the passing game are going to be fine. It's, to me, can the Packers sustain runs throughout the game, not get to a point where they're playing catch up with that offense? I think we talked about it when we were going over best bets, but the Lions are one of the best 11 personnel teams in the NFL when it comes to running. So even if they lose Decker and they can't do kind of the 12T where they bring in a tackle instead of a tight end, they can go ahead and play a whole entire game in 11 personnel and be completely fine. So I think they can mitigate some of that as well on offense.
Yeah, it's war of attrition in the NFL, and like the Lions some of these injuries will start to matter at some point, and they're relatively healthy on the offensive side, but it looks like it's already started to show up some as these games have gotten closer the last few weeks, and they're not just like running people off the field the way they were. But we'll have to see. Another divisional matchup Sunday night. The Chiefs are 3.5-point favorites at home against the Chargers. Do the football gods continue to give them wins, or does Harbaugh get it done against the Chiefs? I'll let you go, Scott.
I think the Chiefs are going to win this game, and probably not cover. I think it's a field goal game either way. Look, the Chargers could certainly beat the Chiefs. I think the Chargers have actually shown, and particularly their defense has shown a few, a few. I don't know what the right term is, like chinks or welts or whatever it is in the armor over the last couple of weeks. To me, the question is whether or not the Chiefs can get back to running the ball, and that goes alongside being able to protect Patrick Mahomes. I really would like to see DJ Humphries get in there and play for the Chiefs. But the Chargers have the ability to put pressure on them. And so the question is whether or not, like, Andy Reid's going to commit to running the ball. Last week, Pacheco was 7 for 44, and I think Hunt was like 7 for 16. Like, they've got Pacheco back. They need to lean on him and run the ball. I see them doing that. So then it becomes a question of how much Herbert, McConkey, and that offense can get going against what has been a pretty vulnerable Chiefs defense. But I think this is one with a couple extra days of rest for the Chiefs, and one where they know they have to have in division, where you're going to see them come out and be relatively on point.
Yeah, I think you're right. The Chargers defense has kind of cooled off in the past month. Just some different things. Like early in the year, they were one of the best light box defense, run fitting defenses that we've seen. We know the Chiefs like to run a lot of light box looks. That manufacture light box looks. And I think what we've seen is a cooling off, like you said, last month in that they've actually kind of sunk down below the NFL average in that metric in terms of success rate. I think the one thing that concerns me is that the Chargers cannot take advantage of the porous secondary of the Chiefs. That's the big kicker. If they could pass the ball, that's why I think actually the Broncos are a bigger threat to the Chiefs in the division than the Chargers, just because the passing game for the Broncos is so much better than the Chargers. And the defense, once they get Riley Moss back, will be back. I mean, it's still basically the top defense in the NFL, maybe outside of Minnesota. So to me, that's the team that I would be like, I don't want to see in the playoffs after I've played them twice. That would be the team, and not necessarily the Chargers.
Yeah, I think you're 100%. I don't know if bigger threat, just because record wise, the Chargers.
Yeah, threat means like, I get what threat means. Like, they can overtake them. They're not, but
they're definitely a worse matchup. Yeah. And particularly what they can do off the edge too, with the challenges that the Chiefs have had at tackle. I think they're definitely a worse matchup. Part of what has gotten lost in the Chiefs winning close games over the last couple of weeks is if you look at those adjusted EPA charts per game, like EPA per play charts that Jackson's been putting out. Shout out to Jackson, Jack Tay Stats, our data scientist. The Chiefs offense is getting more efficient week by week. And they're actually, like, their passing game is actually, if you take away the sacks, getting better week to week. I actually think that's part of why Andy Reid has gotten a little bit greedy and started to go away from the run a little bit. And so, like, I think last week's game against the Raiders was probably a bit of a breaking point where he's like, oh, okay, I've got DeAndre Hopkins. I can do some stuff in the passing game. Worthy's actually getting better, but I can't just abandon and get away from the run, like, all the way. And we have Pacheco back, which is going to make our running game a little bit more efficient. So I think that's been lost in the Chiefs playing a couple close games over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, Mahomes' numbers have actually been a lot better since DeAndre Hopkins came in. He has like a almost 100 passer rating, 99 point something, and his his career average is like 102. So he's been kind of back to normal since DeAndre Hopkins came in. It's just a matter. I think like they got Pacheco's feet wet his first week back, but he's got fresh legs, and like they need to just use him the way they were early in the year. Now that his feet are wet, so to speak.
They will. I looked at his. I don't think it's the right play, but I was looking at his over for Monday night.
Sunday night, right?
Sunday night.
Yeah.
Sunday night. Sorry.
Scott's on fire today.
Dude, I need an ice bath big time.
You're not gonna need an ice bath. Actually, you're iced down already.
This happens when I didn't sleep that much last night. And sometimes when I don't sleep that much and then wake up and the kids are all riled up and I just like roll right into the work day. I'm just Dave Kluge talking fantasy. I'm getting all excited.
Sleep is important. Follow the science. Let's dive into our picks for the week. And we might hit on a couple other games while we're giving these picks. Scott, I'm going to let you go first this week since you're on fire already. We go with a player prop, an over-under, and a game line every week. We each give a pick. Just for the record, I'm 19-11 now. Well outpacing Scott and Cody. We'll just leave it at that.
You want me to give all three of them?
Yeah, give them all three.
All right. Listen, I know you're trying to make fun of me a little bit. I've been slowly creeping my way back, and with a 3-0 performance this week, and you'll probably go 1-2, maybe 0-3. We're gonna be pretty close. So I'm just saying, I've been putting together some 3-0 and 2-1 weeks repeatedly over the last several. Here's what I'm going with.
That's what you are. Then you are what you repeatedly do, as Cody would say.
Yeah, I know. So I'm repeatedly between 67 and 100% correct. Okay. My first, that's how the math works out. For the listeners out there. First pick, we have done pretty well on trusting the run defenses of the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Vikings. I'm going to trust it again. I'm going to take Bijan Robinson under his number of currently at 71 yards against the Minnesota Vikings. I think, like, if you watched any of that Falcons Chargers game last week, Kirk Cousins is a statue. He threw 4 picks. He can't move. Like, I am quite positive that Flores is going to shut down the run game and try to heat up Cousins and make him beat them, which I don't think he can do. But I'm taking Bijan Robinson under 71 against the Vikings. I'm going to go Thursday night, and something that, you said we as a company collectively are on the Lions. I keep repeating this stat. I believe it's now the Lions are 46-16 against the spread over the last 62 games. Bad matchup for them. They're not happy about everyone talking about them only winning by 3 against the Bears on Thanksgiving. They're at home. Give me the Lions covering 3.5 against the Packers. I think this is a touchdown game, maybe more. And then finally, Eagles-Panthers over 46, I believe, is the number. Couple things. Panthers defense is terrible. And the Eagles will be able to run and put up points all over them. But this bet hinges on the fact that Bryce Young and that offense have been pretty good over the last several weeks. And they're particularly a good running team. And we talked about how, like, Chiefs run defense has been good for us. They weren't good for us against the Panthers. That Chuba Hubbard actually went over against the Chiefs. And this Eagles defense is meant to bend but not break against the run. And so I see the Panthers being able to get off a little bit on the run, doing a little bit underneath Bryce Young in the passing game. And so I see this being like, it's a 12.5 point spread, but I see it being like 30-20 Eagles.
Yeah, the Panthers have looked like an NFL team the last several weeks. So, like, and that's what you need in these games with big spreads to go over. You need the underdog to kind of stay in it. So, I will go next and let Cody finish us off this week. I'm going to start with a player prop. This this has more to do with the quarterback on the other team than the quarterback I'm taking. I'm going to start with Russell Wilson over 242 yards. And it's because of the Jameis Winston experience. Like, he's been playing in shootouts. He's been like scoring a lot of points for the Browns have been scoring a lot of points, which has resulted in the other teams having to go up and down the field. And the Browns defense gave up a bunch of yards to Bo Nix. Russell Wilson over 242 feels good. I think he threw for over 400 against the Bengals last week. And I'll parlay that into the Steelers Browns over 44.5.
I like that.
Jameis Winston will score for both teams. So you got to love that. If Jameis Winston's giving you like easy takes on games, you gotta ride it until it runs out and Dorian Thompson-Robinson comes in. So I'll go Steelers Browns over 44.5. They went over the last time they played, and it was in a literal snowstorm where you could barely see the screen. And I don't know the exact weather this time around, but I have to assume it won't be that again. Or even if it is, they might go over anyways. We have that projected 25.9 to 20 in the app, which purports to over as well. And then my last one, the game pick, I'll go with the Minnesota Vikings -5.5 at home over the Atlanta Falcons. Kirk Cousins threw 4 picks last week. The Falcons seem to be trending in the wrong direction. The Vikings just keep winning games. Could I see them only winning by a field goal? Yeah, it's possible. But the Vikings, the Falcons only scored 13 points against the Chargers, a defense that both of you said has been kind of trending in the wrong direction. So I could easily see the Vikings winning by 5.5 in that game.
Like those.
I like all those picks. I particularly like the first two. I'm pissed I didn't see the Russell Wilson one, but that feels like a pretty safe bet. And the app is like loves it. Plus 11%, 51 plus 51, great matchup for him. So
yeah, and the Browns secondary has really fallen off this year. I think it's a combination of a lot of things, but they've had to actually play a lot more zone. They haven't been playing a lot man. I just think that's something you're going to get a lot of outside isolations, which is exactly what the Steelers are built for and what Russell Wilson is the best at.
For sure. Cody,
what's the over under on stupid personal foul penalties from George Pickens?
Oh, 2. Yeah, 2 for sure.
2.5.
1.5 is probably
1.5. 1.5. Yeah.
1.5. He'll for sure get one. For sure get one.
All right, Cody, what do you got this week?
Okay, I'm going to take player prop is going to be Giants running back Tyrone Tracy playing the worst run defense in the league in the Saints. What is the one thing the Giants can actually do that's run the ball? Danny DeVito's going to be playing. They're going to try and protect him. Dable's just going to get behind that run. I would go ahead and hammer that right now. I think it's over 57 is what we have. That's way too low. Bills Rams over 49.5. That has shootout written all over it. I think I even said earlier, I think it's going to be a 30-20 game. That's 50. That would put it over. I think there's going to be 50 plus points scored in that game. And that's not an indictment on the Bills defense, by the way. That's just you're facing an offense that's really, really good. The Bills are facing a defense that has a D line, but is not going to be able to kind of keep up, I think, with Allen and that offense. And then last one I've got is I think the Cardinals are going to beat the Seahawks. They're going to go over the 2. I think they win by a field goal against the Seahawks at home.
Yeah, I looked at that one. I like that as well. The Seahawks barely survived the Jets last week, so there seems to be some smoke and mirrors there, but they're leading the division.
That whole division is wild. I mean, we want the Rams to be good and they're not. We want the Cardinals to suck and they don't. And then we want Seattle to just figure something out, whether it's offense or defense, whether it's running the ball or playing any kind of semblance of defense. So
I have no idea what to make of the Cardinals. like I was sure that the Cardinals were good and winning this division, and I took them -1 at Seattle a couple of weeks ago, and they lost by 10, right? And then but just my one betting story for the pod. I think the best bet I made last week was Steelers money line. Steelers were 3-point dogs, and Cardinals were 4.5-point dogs. Steelers and Cardinals money line together was like plus 480, and I thought it was the money bet, and it was money until Jonathan Gannon got scared to go for it on 4th down and goal, and they lost. But I don't know what to make of the Cardinals. I also don't know what to make of the Seahawks. Like Geno Smith is just like a slightly better version of Jameis, I feel like.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
100%.
The only team in that division that like it doesn't make sense because they've been so good for so long, but people can kind of understand them and like see what they are is the 49ers. And the 49ers are having an epically bad season compared to expectations, but like they could still squeeze into the playoffs somehow because of that division. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Let's wrap, fellas. Scott has Bijan Robinson under 71, Lions cover, Eagles Panthers over. Cody has Tyrone Tracy over, Bills Rams over, Cardinals cover. I have Russell Wilson over, Minnesota cover, and Steelers Browns over. Fellas, it was a good time today. Any last words?
3-0 this week for me.
You've been listening to The Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Follow us on X at Field Vision MI, Instagram, fieldvisionsports.com as well. Download the app. Check out the blog. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.
I'm going to go cool off. You should do the same, Cody.
Okay. I'm on it.